How could Cure blunder like that? Has Uthermal figured out the counter to Skytles? And how likely is it that you will be killed by hail in your lifetime? All of these questions will be answered in today's episode of StarCraft Today.
StarCraft Today.
Your favorite StarCraft news show. An exciting week of GSL as we had Group B kick off on last Thursday, and that was a group with some very interesting series. The first series of the night saw Cure continue his dominating streak from the round of 20, as in game 1 he opened up with a proxy Rex into an eBay block, to which Creator did not quite have a brilliant answer. Cure managed to take out a bunch of workers as well as deny the natural for an insanely long time. The follow-up mind drops dealt a decent amount of damage as well and kept Cure in a massive lead, which allowed him to easily win the base trade that Creator tried to go for when Cure moved out. The second game saw an aggressive blink push versus some sneaky Banshee harass. Both players eventually managed to clean up the respective threats, but once again it was Cure who walked away with a massive lead in workers. Creator slowly but surely clawed his way back into the game by hitting a couple of big disruptor shots from a prism on workers as well as on Cure's army. The game made a definitive swing into Cure's favor when the Terran managed to snipe a couple of disruptors near the fort and Creator continued to not get any upgrades for his own units, and then Cure indeed eventually managed to pick up that win and win the series 2-0. The second series of the night was a TVT between Maru and Bian, and in the first game Maru immediately showed why he is considered the best Terran versus Terran player in the world. Maru seemingly only having two plans in the matchup. Plan 1 is get ahead and kill the opponent, or Plan 2, get behind and kill the opponent after camping for a bit. In game 1 Maru went for the first option as he managed to get slightly ahead in the early game and then just marched over Bian's tank lines. The second game started out a little different, with Bian opening up with a proxy 2-Rex Reaper, which, despite Maru's fast scout, managed to deal quite some damage. This got followed up with a double Cyclone drop, which perhaps dealt a little more damage than it should have, which in turn allowed Bian to eventually capitalize on his lead and break through Maru's well set up defenses. The third set of this series was an absolutely insane game, which wholeheartedly deserves the title Game of the Week. Starting with a base trade like early game in which Bian loses more workers but secures a Raven advantage, about 2 minutes after the initial base trade, a second base trade starts when Bian boosts his Medivacs and Ravens into Maru's main base and starts going ham in Maru's base, while Maru's doing the same to Bian's natural. The game temporarily stabilizes until Bian goes for a wild air unit only attack, which puts Bian in a massive supply lead. The Shopify Terran then tries to go for a kill with his main army and forces a lift on Maru's natural base while being on 3 bases himself. Sadly for Bian, Maru sneaks out 4 Medivacs with 16 Marines, which manage to kill 46 workers and allows Maru to sit at home on top of his main ramp and just defend his main base. Eventually Maru breaks out of his main while dropping at the same time and makes a miraculous comeback, winning the game and the series. The third series of the day saw Cure take an easy win in game number 1 versus DRG with a powerful 3-Rex proxy play, which the Zerg did not have an answer for. The second game of the series started out better for the Zerg, who hardly took any damage versus the Hellion Banshee harass. On top of that, DRG realized he was being 2.5 base all-in and opted for a Roach Ravager defense, which held the push without too many issues. Cure managed to eventually max out, but when he got caught out of position with the majority of his tanks on the left side of the map, DRG rapidly counterattacked and took an easy dub. The final game of the series contains perhaps the biggest blunder in a high-stakes game that I've seen in a very, very long time. Cure went for a 2-base Hellbat Marauder Viking all-in, but rather than building an armory, which is required to turn Hellions into Hellbats, Cure accidentally built a fusion core. The moment the push arrived, DRG had no Baneling Nest, no Roach Warren, and didn't even have the Queens in the correct position. A complete free win for Cure if he would have been capable of morphing his Hellions into Hellbats. This gigantic blunder allowed DRG to eventually hold off this very dedicated attack and put the Zerg in a massively winning position. DRG opts for a counterattack and manages to easily pick up game number 3 in an undeserving fashion, and a very important win in the series. The fourth series of the day saw an ultra-aggressive Creator catch Maru off guard, starting with a Proxy Oracle dealing some damage, later on followed up by a Stalker Oracle attack which took out even more SCVs, and then the nail in the coffin being the eventual Blink Stalker Oracle Phoenix semi all-in, which Maru couldn't defend anymore. The second game started out with Maru going for a double gas opener into a mine drop, which hardly dealt any damage except for delaying some mining time. Creator's blink pressure follow-up did manage to deal some damage, as it took out a clean 8 SCVs initially and 6 more later on with stalkers in the prism. Maru's counter drop killed 9 workers but didn't quite kill as much of Creator's army, and when Creator eventually managed to move across the map with his superiorly teched Storm Archon army, Maru couldn't manage to hold his low ground natural base, and after some back and forth trading, we eventually saw the Protoss take game number 2 home as well. The final series of the day saw DRG lose map 1 once again versus a Terran, as Beyond opened up with a dedicated 2.5 base push, dealing a little bit too much damage to the Zerg. This allowed the Korean Terran player to eventually leverage this lead into a win when he pushed out with a 30 supply advantage over his Zerg adversary. The second game saw a 2-base 3-rex SCV pool, barely not managing to break the Zerg defense, and after a second failed attempt from Beyond, the Terran player felt forced to tap out, tying up the series 1-1. In the final game of the day, Beyond went for a proxy 3-rex, the same strat that Cure managed to take out DRG with earlier that same day. Sadly for the Shopify Terran player, it didn't go as swimmingly for him as for Cure, as Dongrei Gu held relatively easily and carved out a nice spot for himself in the game. DRG comfortably held the follow-up 2-base all-in attempt as well and practically won the game from there on out. He only had to wait out Beyond's extended death animation to receive his well-deserved win. These results led to the following standings in Group B. DRG in a convincing first place, taking out both of his opponents with a 2-1 victory, Cure in second, Creator in third, Maru in a surprising fourth place, and Beyond in a disappointing last after losing both of his series with a 1-2 score. That brings us to last Monday, where we saw Group A finish up. For the people with a very short-term memory, this is what Group A looked like before Day 2 started. Gumiho, Ragnarok and Hero in the top 3, and both Bunny and Solar with an 0-2 series score in 4th and 5th. And in the first series of the day, we saw Ragnarok take out Solar relatively quickly in game 1 with a well-timed Link Flood, which Solar didn't have an answer to. The second game saw Ragnarok attempt to go for another all-in, but this time Solar was ready for it and managed to hold comfortably, acquiring a bit of an eco lead on the back of it. Ragnarok's follow-up all-in also got thwarted, tying up the series 1-1. In the third game, it was Solar who pulled the trigger first, but sadly the bullet that came out wasn't strong enough, as Ragnarok easily held the roach pressure and got himself a neat little army lead. Ragnarok counterattacked after losing a couple of workers later on and managed to kill Solar, who droned up slightly too fast. The second series of the day was between Gumiho and Hero, and in the first game we witnessed a DT rush out of Hero, not dealing any damage as Gumiho cleverly walled his own low ground natural. Gumiho followed it up with a big 150 supply push, which Hero barely managed to hold. This allowed Hero to start slowly inching towards a late game, but Gumiho was still in firm control of the map and also had a major supply lead. That map control allowed Gumiho to initiate a base trade the moment Hero tried to move across the map. This in turn forced a bad army split out of Hero, with Gumiho eventually winning the game after taking out every single disruptor at once. Game 2 started out with some insanely high level play out of Gumiho, sniping 2 observers with a Cyclone while teching into quick Cloak Banshee tech. This allowed Gumiho to pull ahead in eco after taking out a couple of workers with a Banshee and 2 Reapers. Hero tried to go for a big bust of 2.5 base, but got forced back when the 2 Banshee came in to deal more probe damage. At this point, Gumiho had put himself into a practically unlosable position, but his unwillingness to build Ghost bit him in the bum, as a massive Gateway Immortal army managed to eventually fight very efficiently against the poorly upgraded and poorly teched Terran army. The counterattack that Hero launched turned the game into another base trade, but this time around the Protoss was the one who was better prepared and took the win in the end, tying up the series. The final game of that series was a rather odd one, as Gumiho attempted to go for a weird, never before seen 1 base 3 racks, while Hero went for a proxy gate outside of Gumiho's main. I think most TOS players would have ended up losing in this situation, as in my mind this is probably kind of a build order win for the Terran, but Hero's insane micro ended up giving TOS the win of the game and the win of the series. Game 1 of the third best of 3 saw Solar crush Bunny's 2-base push on inside and out and easily picking up the win closely afterwards. The second game was pretty much the reverse of game 1, as Bunny dealt way too much damage with his initial Banshee squad and thus set himself up for an almost unstoppable 1-1 Marine tank timing, which Solar indeed couldn't hold. The final game of the series ended up being a little bit less one-sided. Solar grabbed an initial lead in the game after denying Bunny any damage whatsoever while quickly droning up to 80 workers. The game eventually stabilized into a somewhat even late game, with Solar having the advantage of mining from the neutral gold base. The game started favoring Solar more and more until the first big fight, in which Solar lost all of his Broodlords while Bunny kept at least a small part of his army alive. The Zerg player, however, did manage to remax faster, but couldn't really pressure anything with that massive army due to the slow-moving nature of the Broodlord. The game calmed down again until the next big fight, in which Solar's Infestor didn't take part until a big portion of the Broodlords had already fallen. Solar ends up winning the fight anyway, but doesn't have any mining left and thus can't remax. Bunny still has some money and can actually somewhat rebuild an army, and eventually barely manages to edge out a win. In the battle for the first place between Gumiho and Ragnarok, we saw Ragnarok open up with an uncommon 2-base Spire build in game 1. Gumiho, seemingly confused by this, ended up losing a little too many Hellions on the map and giving up his map control. Ragnarok kept a firm grasp on this game and eventually won with a beautiful Lingbane Muta cleanup close to Gumiho's base. The second game saw a failed Roach push put Gumiho in a minor lead, which the Terran later on leveraged into a quick 10-minute win. The final game had Ragnarok open up with another 2-base Spire, just like in game 1, and once again, after a bunch of confusing moves out of Gumiho, the Korean Zerg player established a nice 20 supply lead for himself in the game. The game truly started favoring the Zerg after a beautiful Lurker fake into a real Broodlord attack, and then a couple of minutes later, a real Lurker Baneling attack, which once again got Gumiho with the pants down, giving the win to Ragnarok. The final series of the day was Bunny versus Hero, and if Bunny were to win 2-0 versus the GSL champion, the current GSL champion would be knocked out. Game 1 started with a quick storm rush out of the Protoss, which Bunny countered by not walking into the storms, brilliant moves. Bunny then followed this up with a quick tank push and obliterated Hero's defenses, giving the Game 1 win to Bunny. With everything on the line, Hero decided that now might be a good time for a 1-base Stargate proxy play. And indeed it was, as he secured a bunch of worker and marine kills, allowing for a quick third base and charge follow-up. Hero crushed the 2-base all-in push that followed and easily won the game afterwards with a massive supply advantage. The final game of the series saw an in-control Hero dictate the pace of the game from start to finish. Good harass in the early game, solid run-bys in the mid-game, and a beautiful push in the end to finish it all up. That led to Hero ending up in second place of this group, Ragnarok in first, Gumiho in third, and Bunny and Solar falling out in fourth and fifth place, respectively. Now that wasn't the only StarCraft 2 this week, because as always we also had 3 ESL Open Cups, starting on the Sunday in Korea, where we saw Gumiho take out Beyond in a close 3-2 series. Meanwhile, over in Europe, we saw Clem for a second week in a row once again taking out Hero Marine in the finals with a 3-1 score. The final cup of the week in America had a Max Specs Solar final, and despite the last 3 series between these two going in favor of Max Specs, this time around it was the Korean who walked away with a 3-1 victory after a cheeky little Bane bust in game number 4. That brings us to this week's clip of the week from Uthermal, who has a very special counter to Airtos.
Annoyed. Oh crap. My mines are not in time. Annoyed. Oh my god! Holy fuck! Come here, where are you going, bitch?
Well, good lord, I'm glad I ain't one of those carriers. Sadly, that's going to be it for me today, but not before we answer the final question. And that question is, how likely is it that you're going to get killed by hail? Well, apparently pretty unlikely, as in the past 100 years in the US, only 3 people have died at the hands of hailstorms. However, there was one event in 1888 that reportedly killed 246 people. On the 30th of April of that year, hailstones the size of goose eggs, oranges, and cricket balls were reported falling out of the sky. So the chance of a single person from hail is pretty small in their lifetime, but if you find yourself in a scenario where there's oranges, goose eggs, or cricket balls falling out of the sky, it might be best to look for some cover. Alright, that's my weekly advice. I hope you all enjoyed this episode. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see all of you next time for a new video. Thanks so much for watching, and bye bye.